Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. And since it's Friday, we are addressing, or this is called, Responding to the Critics. This is video number 50 in our review and response to the book written by Gregg entitled, Why Not Full Preterism? As I have noted before, this book is a very obvious, very glaring attempt to respond to the things that were brought up in my two-day formal public debate with Gregg in Denver some years ago. And as I mentioned, in the book, he mentions me 140 times. And again, I'm not offended by that at all. So in the last several now, videos, I've been addressing his closing section of the book. In this closing section, Steve presents to the reader some supposed arguments made by full preterists. Now, some of the arguments, as I've already mentioned, are just blatant misrepresentations of what preterists believe. I mean, I literally couldn't believe what I was reading when I read what Steve said. He claimed that preterists claim that Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is the only Old Testament prophecy of the resurrection. I don't know if any preterist believes that. None, period, zilch. So why Steve would make that argument is literally beyond me. Well, again, this is video number 50. And on page 359, Steve gives the following argument. It is point number 16. The preterist argument is there can be no future end of the present age according to Scripture. The full preterist argument says there cannot be an end to the present age hence no future parousia because the Bible teaches that the current age has no end. The kingdom of Christ has no end, Daniel 2:44, Luke 1:33, Revelation 11:15. And yeah, that is certainly my argument. In Daniel chapter 2, 28 through 40, Daniel chapter 2, 28 through 44, we have the vision of the four kingdoms. And in the days of the fourth kingdom, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom that shall never pass away. It shall never be destroyed. Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, the Son of Man comes before the Ancient of Days. There's given to him a kingdom of all kindred, tongues, tribes, nations, and it is a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, shall never pass away. Now, it seems to me that's pretty definitive. In Luke chapter 1, 32 and 33, when the angel spoke to Mary and said that her son, to him, the God of heaven shall give to him the throne of his father David, and he shall rule, and of the rule of and of his kingdom, of his rule and of his kingdom, there shall be no end. Okay, no end of his rule, his throne, his kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, how much clearer could it be? In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 21 and following, the writer speaks of how at the giving of the law and the establishing of Israel's covenant world, his voice then shook the earth. And yet, once more, he says, I shake not only the earth, but the heavens also. Now this word, yet once more, signifies the removing of those things which are made, so that those things which cannot be moved shall remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, in other words, the kingdom of Christ can never pass away. It can never cease functioning. Now, all those passages, and there are more. I love Ephesians 3:20 and 21. Now unto him, that is God, be glory in the church by Jesus Christ throughout all ages, age without end. G.K. Beale, a noted Greek scholar, world-class Greek scholar, says that the force of this Greek term here is the strongest expression in the Greek for endlessness. So the church has no end. So, in face of these seemingly clear-cut passages, how does Gregg respond to this? And he says, well, the kingdom established by Christ has no end, but it progresses through stages. As Jesus stated in the parable of the growing seed, Mark chapter 4, 26 to 29. Each phase has an end as it transitions to the next. The seed stage ended with the coming of the blade. The blade stage ended with the formation of heads. When the grain is ripe, the growth stage will also end. When the harvest comes, after the harvest, the kingdom continues in its eternal mature stage. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I call, and with all due respect to my friend, a good bit of pedantic sophistry. This is a word salad. That means that in the texts which speak of the end of the age. Now, consider this. In Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, the apostles asked Jesus about the signs of the coming end of the age, suntelia tu aeoniou. The end of what age? The end of the age represented by the temple and Jerusalem, not the new covenant age at all. So let me ask, in the Old Testament, did the Old Covenant kingdom, the theocracy, did it go through different stages? Well, of course it did. You had the stage of the United Kingdom. The stage of the United Kingdom came when Jeroboam took the 10 northern tribes north. Did the kingdom cease to exist? Well, of course not. When the 10 northern tribes were carried off into captivity in 721 BC, was that the end of the kingdom at all? Well, it was certainly the end of a stage, but the kingdom kept on going. The kingdom did not end. And Steve is trying to say that, and yet he is entrapping himself. What he is saying is, well, you got the seed, and then you got the growth, you got the head, you got the harvest. And so he closes that by saying, after the harvest, the kingdom continues in its eternal mature stage. Well, yeah, but the end of each one of those phases is not the end of the age, and it's not the end of the kingdom. So on the one hand, Steve is saying, well, preterists say the kingdom has no end. And Steve says, well, I agree with that. But then he says, oh, but there are stages that have an end. That's not the point. You see, this is pure smoke. This is dust. I mean, it's obfuscation in the extreme. Nobody is doubting that the church had a state of immaturity. Paul says, when I was a child, spoke as a child, thought as a child. And he's giving that by illustration of the church. In the charismatic stage, it was in the immature stage. So, when that stage ended, it wasn't the end of the kingdom, it was the establishment, full establishment of the kingdom. The eternal, unending kingdom. So Steve is really honestly playing word games here. I don't think Steve's purposely trying to be deceitful at all, but he's trying to escape the force of the argument. The Bible, as we've just seen, is very unequivocal in telling us that the kingdom, the rule, the throne, the reign of Christ has no end. Now, for Steve's quote, argument, unquote, and I really consider this to be a very, very bad argument. But for Steve's argument to have any kind of validity, then these New Testament texts, which speak about the end of the age, and they do speak, ladies and gentlemen, of the end of the age. Okay? Not one of them ever says the end of the kingdom. Oh, wait. The kingdom shall be taken from you and given to another people, bearing forth the fruits thereof. Got to give this some consideration here. And it seems to me that my friend hasn't given this very serious, in-depth thought. So my point of it is, in not one of the passages that speak of the end of the age does it speak of just simply the end of a phase. Consider, if you will, Matthew chapter 13. And that's to use Steve's own illustration. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus told a parable of a sower who went out to sow. And he sowed his seed, and it began to bring forth, but the devil went out and sowed tares among it. Now, this is not the same identical parable as found in Mark chapter 4 about the growth of the seed, some stony soil, some rocky, some good seed, some hard seed, etc. Soil. No, it's not the identical thing, but the point is still the same. All right. So the workers of the field came to the master and said, "Lord, an enemy has sown tares. Do you wish us to go out and to separate them?" He said, "No, let them grow together until the time of the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, gather out the tares first and cast them into the fire. Then gather the wheat into my barn." So shall it be, Jesus said, Matthew chapter 13, verse 39, at the end of the age. Some older translations say the end of this age. Now remember, he's talking about the end of the age. He's talking about the consummation, time of the harvest. Now, Steve says that at the time of the harvest, the kingdom is eternal and its mature stage. He misunderstands the parable of Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13 is the end of the age that was being harvested. That's the old covenant age. You see, what Steve does, he comes to this passage, and just exactly like I did for years and years and years, Steve says, well, the end of the age, that's the harvest is at the end of the Christian age. But then he runs into preterists who point out that the Christian age has no end. And again, Ephesians chapter 3, 20 and 21. Age without end. Forever and forever and forever. Just like Revelation chapter 11. At the coming of the harvest, at the coming of the resurrection, what do we find? The Father takes the kingdom, and as many, if not most translations say, Lord God, you have taken your great power and you have begun to reign. And ye shall reign forever and forever. Once again, G.K. Beale, that Greek construction, strongest expression for endlessness. Well, who rules and reigns with the Father? According to Revelation 22 and verse 3, it's Jesus sitting on the throne with him. So here is Jesus ruling and reigning. But what kingdom is being harvested? Well, it's the kingdom that is being judged in the destruction of the city, quote, where the Lord was crucified, unquote, Revelation 11, verse 8. That's not the new covenant kingdom. At the end of the new covenant, at the supposed end of the new covenant kingdom, there is no destruction of the city where the Lord was crucified. But it is at that time of that harvest, by the way, of the consummation of Israel's festal calendar through Sukkot, the fulfillment of Sukkot. It's at that time, it's the time of the dead that they should be judged. It's the time of your wrath against the nations. It's the time of the prophets that they should be rewarded. When did Daniel say that the time of the dead that they should be rewarded? What was the time in which Daniel the prophet and all the prophets would receive their inheritance? Well, it's obviously at the resurrection. Well, when would the resurrection be? Not at the end of the Christian age, as Gregg posits. No, it would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. That's the end of the kingdom. The old covenant kingdom. Listen to me very carefully. There is only one age. There is only one kingdom in all of the Bible that was said to be going to be terminated. That is the old covenant kingdom. And you can talk about the different phases of that kingdom as we just have, and that's fine. The end of the phases were not the end of the kingdom. The end of the kingdom was with the dissolution of the city and the temple, according to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, when Jesus, in direct response, the apostles, in direct response to Jesus' prediction of the destruction of the city and the temple, said, well, tell us when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Folks, consummation of the age does not mean consummation of one phase, consummation of two phases, 3 phases, 4 phases. It's the full consummation of the ages. Now notice again Matthew chapter 13, when Jesus said, harvest is at the end of the ages. The Son of Man will send forth his angels. They shall gather out of the kingdom all things that offend and shall cast them into the fire. Then, catch the power of this, then shall the righteous shine forth in the kingdom. Well, guess what, folks? That's a direct quote from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. As virtually all scholars agree. Okay, so the harvest is at the end of the age. End of the age. When the righteous shine forth as the kingdom. Daniel chapter 12. But the time of the end, which is the time of the harvest of Matthew 13, is the time of the resurrection. You know, I don't know of anybody that denies that the resurrection of Daniel, well, I do know some. Daniel chapter 12 is the resurrection harvest of Matthew 13. The people who want to deny that are the people who see the train coming. Seriously, men like Kenneth Gentry, who once argued vehemently that Daniel chapter 12 verse 2 has to be the raising of biologically decomposed bodies out of the dust, because after all, the only thing that goes into the dust is physical bodies. That's not at all true. Not biblically, not Hebraically. So Kenneth Gentry saw the train coming because many preterists, including myself, pointed out what Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 says. So once again, Daniel chapter 12 verse 2 is the resurrection at the time of the end when the righteous would shine forth. Matthew 13 is the resurrection, i.e. the harvest, at the time of the end of the age. Daniel 12 would be when the righteous would shine. Matthew chapter 13, when the righteous would shine. Daniel chapter 12 is at the consummation of the appointed time. Daniel chapter 12 verse 3. Daniel chapter 12 verse 13. Soon to Leah, Kairos. Consummation of the appointed time. What appointed time? The time of the resurrection. Perfect correspondence, ladies and gentlemen. So when would that be? Daniel 12, verse 7, when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. When would the end of the age be? At the end of the age. Redundant? Well, the end of the age is when the power of the holy people be completely shattered. That's the harvest. The end of the age. Now listen. When the New Testament and the Old speaks of the kingdom rule of Christ, never ending. Let me reiterate this point. It's critical. It never is speaking about, never uses the terminology of, and by the way, this is critical. This is not an argument simply from missing words, okay? That's a terrible hermeneutic. But if the doctrine was of simply the end of different phases of the kingdom, then it would not use the terminology of the end of the age. It wouldn't even make sense. But instead, we find the explicit terminology of the end of the age, which would arrive at the time of the destruction of the power of the holy people. And by the way, it's both humorous and sad to read the desperate comments of so many, and especially former preterists, who want to go to Daniel chapter 12 and they want to manipulate, they want to distort, they want to change the reading of the text. And by doing so, they do violence both to the Masoretic text and to virtually all translations. Oh, but you see, they've got to destroy, pun intended, they've got to destroy Daniel chapter 12, verse 7 to even come close to maintaining their view of Daniel chapter 12. So I hope you get the point here, ladies and gentlemen. Both the Old Testament and the New speak of the end of the age. When they speak of the end of the age, they are never, ever speaking of simply the end of different phases of the kingdom. They're talking about the consummation. It's just like Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 in the Septuagint. At the appointed time, at the consummation, the Suntelia Kairos, then shall be an end to the desolations. What is the appointed time in Daniel chapter 9? Well, the appointed end is not the end of the 62 weeks or the end of the 69 weeks. No. The end, the appointed end, the kairos, is the end of the 70 weeks. And at the end of the 70 weeks, an end to the desolations of Jerusalem and the temple would be brought to an end. The point being that, once again, when the Bible talks about the end of the age, it's not talking about the end of different phases of the kingdom, but it truly is referring to, after the harvest, the kingdom continues in its eternal mature state. Well, guess what? The kingdom of God was established in the last days of the Old Covenant kingdom. It was growing to maturity during that period of time. And with the passing of the Old Covenant age, the everlasting, unending, unmovable ages of the ages came into full bloom. And thus, the preterist argument is as sound as it can be. Steve wants to deflect over here. Oh, well, different phases, different phases. It's not what the Bible's talking about at all. That's not what preterists are talking about at all. The Bible talks about the consummation of the age. Or, actually, the ages. But it's the full consummation of all of the previous ages. That's why Paul could say, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, the end, the goal, the destiny of all the previous ages, aionios, plural, has arrived. They were living in the time of the consummation of all of the previous ages. Well, guess what? They were not living at the time of the consummation of any new covenant ages. Nope. Of all previous ages. That would be, and by the way, he's using heterosis. Heterosis is a common biblical journalistic practice. This is noted by numerous scholars, Scott McKnight, John Collins, etc. When a plural is used to magnify a singular, sometimes even a singular is used to magnify a plural. This is commonly understood, obviously, except for men like my friend Steve Gregg. Hey, I'm completely out of time. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, Mike Sullivan and I have our plans made. Tonight we're going to film part 2 of our review of the recent debate between Dr. Michael Brown and Steve Gregg. So this will be part 2. We've already posted part 1. So tune in. I'll post that later this evening, and then it will be available certainly on Saturday. In the meantime, do not forget, for the rest of this month, January 24, excuse me, we shall meet him in the air, the wedding of the King of Kings, and leaving the rapture behind. If you purchase these books separately, guess what? You would spend $12 plus more than my price for the rest of this month. Total delivered price for these 2 books, $25. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Click on the tab at the top, order these 2 books. I'll guarantee you, you'll really, really be glad you did. Okay, I'm completely out of time. Thanks for joining me. See you on the flip side.